Black teen helps old man collect his dropped groceries. Months later, he's invited to a stage he never dreamed of standing on. The winter wind howled through the empty streets of downtown Portland as Jordan Walker pulled his thin jacket tighter around his shoulders. Through the foggy windows of Morrison's grocery, he watched an elderly white man struggle with his walking cane and grocery bags. What happened next would spark a chain of events that would expose corruption, challenge prejudices, and test the limits of human kindness. But at that moment, all Jordan saw was someone who needed help, a simple act that would soon put him in the crosshairs of one of the city's most powerful families and change both their lives forever. Hey fam, let us know where you're watching from. If this story touches your heart, don't forget to hit that like button before we dive in. Every location counts. Jordan Walker's bedroom window offered a view of Portland's industrial skyline, where factory smokestacks competed with the morning sun. At 16, he'd already mastered the art of silence, moving through his family's small apartment before dawn to avoid waking his mother, Sarah, who worked night shifts at the hospital until her illness forced her to stop. The walls of his room told his story: academic certificates partially hidden behind work schedules, a half-finished college application buried under utility bills, and a worn copy of Writing Your Way to Success borrowed from the school library 3 months ago. His teachers called him gifted, a word that seemed to mock him now as he juggled 3 part-time jobs to help with his mother's mounting medical bills. Before his mother's diagnosis, Jordan had been on track for a scholarship. His English teacher, Mrs. Reynolds, once said his writing could open doors, but doors required time to knock on them, and time had become a luxury he couldn't afford. Between shifts at Carter's Diner, the local car wash, and weekend lawn care work, his notebooks gathered dust, and his dreams of becoming a writer faded like old newspaper clippings. Sarah Walker had raised Jordan alone after his father's death in a construction accident 12 years ago. The insurance money had long since disappeared into the endless cycle of rent, food, and utilities. Now, with her aggressive lupus requiring expensive treatments, even those basics became a monthly challenge. Jordan watched his mother's pride battle with necessity each time she had to choose between medication and meals. At school, Jordan occupied an invisible middle ground. Not quite an outcast, but not truly connected either. His former friends had slowly drifted away as he missed more social events and study groups. He maintained a B average through sheer determination, completing homework during lunch breaks in between jobs. The school counselor's suggestions of college essays and scholarship applications felt like distant fantasies when compared to the immediate reality of overdue medical bills. His small bedroom doubled as a study, with a salvage desk positioned to catch the morning light. Here, in the precious hours between dawn and his first job, Jordan still wrote quick snippets of stories and observations that he rarely shared. His mother's voice often carried from the past, "Your words are a gift, baby. Don't let anyone tell you different," but lately those words felt like luxury items they couldn't afford. The neighborhood itself shaped Jordan's worldview. Living on the edges of Portland's gentrifying districts meant witnessing daily contrasts: new coffee shops next to closing family businesses, luxury condos rising above struggling communities. He delivered newspapers to homes worth more than his mother would earn in a lifetime, then returned to an apartment where the heating worked only sporadically. Despite everything, Jordan maintained a quiet dignity that his mother had instilled in him. "We might be struggling," she would say, "but we're not broken." He carried these words with him, along with her lessons about kindness and integrity. Even as their circumstances tightened like a slowly closing fist, Jordan refused to let bitterness take root. His part-time jobs taught him about people, their assumptions, their prejudices, and occasionally their unexpected kindness. Some customers at the diner would leave extra tips with encouraging notes. Others would clutch their purses tighter when he approached their tables. Each interaction added another layer to his understanding of how the world saw him, a tall, young black man in a city still wrestling with its own prejudices. In quiet moments, usually late at night when the apartment settled into silence, Jordan would open his worn notebook and write about the world he observed. His words captured the dignity in struggle, the humanity in small gestures, and the dreams that persisted despite everything. These private pages held the truth of his experience, the weight of responsibility on young shoulders, the cost of kindness in a suspicious world, and the stubborn hope that somehow all of this would lead somewhere better. Little did he know that his chance encounter with Alfred Thompson would test every lesson he'd learned, challenge every assumption he'd faced, and ultimately open doors he never knew existed, though not without a price that would demand everything he had to give. Alfred Thompson's Victorian home on Portland's historic district stood as a fading reminder of literary greatness. Once bustling with literary salons and publishing parties, the three-story house now sat quiet, its rooms filled with dusty manuscripts and memories. At 72, Alfred had become something of a ghost in his own life, haunting the halls where success once echoed. 30 years ago, his novel Shadows of Conscience had earned him a Pulitzer nomination and established him as one of America's most promising voices. The book, a searing exploration of moral choices in times of crisis, had seemed prophetic given what would later unfold in his own life. Now those same worn copies sat in his study, their spines a reminder of how far he had fallen from grace. His son, William Thompson, cast a long shadow over Alfred's legacy. As Portland's deputy district attorney and chairman of the prestigious Thompson Literary Foundation, William had transformed his father's literary reputation into political capital. Few remembered that the foundation's initial funding came from Alfred's publishing success, not William's legal career. Even fewer knew the truth about the plagiarism scandal that had nearly destroyed them both. The evidence sat in Alfred's private safe manuscripts, proving William had secretly ghostwritten novels under Alfred's name during his father's period of depression, then sold the rights without consent. When Alfred discovered the deception, William had leveraged his political connections to bury the scandal. The choice had been presented as protection of the family legacy. In reality, it had been the beginning of Alfred's self-imposed exile. These days, Alfred's world had shrunk to manageable proportions. His arthritis made the silver-handled cane a constant companion, and his grocery trips to Morrison's became weekly adventures. The store's employees knew him as the polite but reserved old man who always carried exact change and refused plastic bags. None recognized him as the author whose words once moved thousands. The house's library, once his sanctuary, now felt more like a mausoleum. Leather-bound first editions gathered dust while literary awards tarnished in their cases. Alfred spent most mornings here attempting to write but producing only fragments. His last authentic work, published 15 years ago, had been overshadowed by the ghost-written novels that followed books he had never read but bore his name. William's weekly visits had become exercises in careful conversation. They discussed the foundation's work, local politics, and William's growing influence in Portland's power circles. They never mentioned the manuscripts, the betrayal, or the weight of unspoken truths that hung between them. Alfred watched his son's rise to power with a mixture of pride and horror, recognizing in William's ambition the same drive that had once fueled his own creativity. The household staff had dwindled to occasional cleaning service, though Alfred suspected these were William's spies rather than actual helpers. His son's concern for his welfare felt more like surveillance, especially after Alfred had threatened to come clean about the ghost-written books during a particularly bitter argument. In his more lucid moments, Alfred recognized the irony of his situation. He had written countless stories about moral compromise and its consequences, yet lived in a cage built from his own silence. His remaining friends, mostly aging writers and retired professors, had gradually stopped visiting, perhaps sensing the heavy atmosphere of unspoken secrets. The only peace Alfred found now was in mentoring young writers through anonymous online forums, using a pseudonym to share the wisdom he could no longer claim publicly. Even this small act of rebellion felt dangerous. William had made it clear that any attempt to rebuild Alfred's literary connections would have unfortunate consequences for everyone involved. Yet something in Alfred refused to completely surrender. Each morning he still sat at his desk, facing the blank page with the same determination that had once produced award-winning prose. His hands might shake, and the words might come slower, but the desire to tell the truth, his truth, burned as bright as ever. He couldn't have known that a chance encounter with a young man outside Morrison's grocery would soon test his courage, challenge his complicity, and offer one last chance at redemption, though the price would be higher than anything he had paid before. The fluorescent glare of Morrison's grocery cast harsh shadows across the wet sidewalk as Alfred Thompson struggled with his walking cane and paper bags. The evening had turned bitter, with February wind cutting through his wool coat and arthritis making his fingers clumsy. The sound of his groceries hitting the pavement echoed like gunshots in the urban canyon. "Someone should help him," a woman murmured, hurrying past with her phone pressed to her ear. Others simply stepped around the scattered items, their eyes averted from the elderly man's struggle. A can of soup rolled toward the gutter, leaving a trail through a puddle of spilled milk. Jordan Walker's appearance seemed to crystallize the ambient prejudices floating in the air. As the tall black teenager approached Alfred, the shift in atmosphere was palpable. A woman clutched her designer purse closer, while a man in a business suit subtly positioned himself between Jordan and his own shopping cart. "Let me help you, sir," Jordan said, already kneeling to gather the scattered groceries. His worn work uniform from Carter's Diner was visible beneath his thin jacket, but some observers saw only what they expected to see: a threat rather than a helper. Martha Chin, Morrison's evening manager, watched the scene unfold through the store's front windows. She'd worked there long enough to know how quickly situations could escalate. Her hand hovered over the security button as she observed the interaction between the elderly white man and the young black teenager. "I think we should call the police," suggested Karen Whitman, a regular customer known for her vocal concerns about neighborhood changes. She was already pulling out her phone, her fingers poised over the keypad. Better safe than sorry. Before Martha could respond, two police officers who had been getting coffee at the shop next door approached the scene. Officer Brian Miller's hand instinctively moved to rest on his holstered weapon, while his partner, Officer Sarah Rodriguez, took in the situation with narrowed eyes. "Everything all right here?" Officer Miller's voice carried the edge of authority, directed squarely at Jordan despite Alfred being the obvious victim of circumstance. The tension crackled like static electricity. Jordan's hand stilled over the groceries, his mother's warnings echoing in his mind. One wrong move, one misinterpreted gesture, and this simple act of kindness could become tomorrow's headline. Alfred Thompson drew himself up to his full height, his silver-handled cane planting firmly on the wet concrete. "Officers," he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of respect earned in Portland's corridors of power, "this young man is assisting me after your fellow citizens demonstrated a remarkable lack of common decency." The authority in Alfred's tone caused both officers to reassess the situation. Officer Rodriguez noticed Jordan's work uniform, the careful way he handled the spilled groceries, the respect in his posture despite the obvious tension. "Sir, we just want to ensure," Officer Miller began, but Alfred cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Ensure what exactly? That kindness gets punished? That we teach young people to walk past others in need?" Alfred's voice carried down the street, drawing more onlookers. "I'm Alfred Thompson, and I've been a resident of this neighborhood longer than most of you have been alive. What I'm seeing here tonight shames us all." The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken recriminations. Karen Whitman's phone disappeared into her purse. Martha stepped back from the security button. Officer Miller's hand dropped from his weapon. Jordan continued gathering groceries, his movements deliberate and calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. He produced a reusable bag from his backpack, carefully transferring items from the torn paper bags. "My apartment is just 3 blocks away," Alfred announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "This young man is going to help me carry my groceries home, and then he's going to join me for hot chocolate, because that's what civilized people do when someone shows them kindness." The crowd began to disperse, some looking shamefaced, others muttering under their breath. The officers nodded to Alfred, who acknowledged them with cool politeness. As Jordan stood with the properly packed groceries, Alfred placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Shall we, young man?" he asked, but his eyes swept the dispersing crowd with quiet challenge. "I believe we have quite a lot to discuss." Alfred Thompson's Victorian home loomed before them, its weathered elegance a stark contrast to Jordan's usual surroundings. Steam rose from their footprints on the frost-covered steps as Alfred fumbled with his keys, his hands shaking slightly from both cold and emotion. "Forgive the dust," Alfred said as they entered the dimly lit foyer. "I've become rather selective about who maintains this place." His tone carried a weight Jordan couldn't yet understand, though he'd soon learn about the cleaning staff who reported his every move to William. The kitchen, despite its commercial-grade appliances and marble countertops, felt lived in and warm. Alfred moved with practiced efficiency, pulling down an antique tin of cocoa powder while Jordan arranged the groceries on the counter. The scene might have appeared ordinary to an outsider, just an elderly man and his young helper sharing a winter evening, but both felt the significance of the moment. "You right?" Alfred asked, suddenly nodding toward Jordan's backpack where a notebook peeked out. The question caught Jordan off guard. He'd grown used to hiding this part of himself. "Sometimes," Jordan admitted, accepting the steaming mug of hot chocolate. "Nothing special, just thoughts and stories." His fingers traced the cup's rim, a nervous habit his mother always noticed. Alfred's eyes crinkled with interest. "In my experience," he said, settling into a kitchen chair, "those who say nothing special about their writing often have the most interesting things to say." He paused, studying Jordan with unexpected intensity. "Would you share something with me?" Jordan hesitated, then slowly pulled out his notebook. The pages were cramped with his neat handwriting, observations and story fragments filling every available space. With slightly trembling hands, he read a short piece about dawn at Carter's Diner, the way Hope arrived with the first customers, carrying dreams as fresh as morning coffee. Alfred listened with closed eyes, his expression shifting from polite interest to genuine engagement. When Jordan finished, the silence held something electric. "You have a gift for capturing humanity," Alfred said finally. "Your words. They remind me of why I started writing." The revelation of Alfred's identity as a former celebrated author unfolded naturally, though Jordan would later realize how carefully Alfred had guided the conversation. They discussed favorite books, the power of words, and the way stories could change perspectives. Neither mentioned the incident outside the grocery store directly, but its lessons about prejudice and perception flavored their discussion. "Writing isn't just about putting words on paper," Alfred explained, refilling their cups. "It's about seeing the truth and having the courage to share it." His hand shook slightly as he spoke, and Jordan noticed how his eyes darted to the study door, where shadows seemed to hold secrets. As the evening deepened, they established a tentative plan. Jordan would visit twice a week, ostensibly to help with groceries and household tasks. In reality, Alfred would mentor him in writing, sharing decades of experience and wisdom. "There's one condition," Alfred said as Jordan prepared to leave. "Everything we discuss stays between us. No social media, no sharing with friends." His tone carried an urgency Jordan didn't yet understand. "Some stories need time to be told properly." Standing on the porch, Jordan felt the weight of possibility in his notebook. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything tonight." Alfred watched the young man disappear into the darkness, his heart lighter than it had been in years. In Jordan's raw talent and unflinching honesty, he saw a chance for redemption, though he couldn't know how high the price would be. Inside, he moved to his study, pulling out a fresh journal. For the first time in years, words flowed freely as he wrote about courage shown in small moments, about youth and age finding common ground, about hope appearing in unexpected places. The grandfather clock struck 9, reminding Alfred that William would call soon for his nightly check-in. He carefully locked the journal away, knowing his son's questions would probe for any changes in routine. But tonight, Alfred had something precious to protect, not just his own possible redemption, but the fragile beginning of a bond that might just save them both. "Jordan's kindness deserves a like, yet this brave young man hasn't received one from you yet. Let's show him some love with a quick tap on that like button." The discovery came accidentally during Jordan's third week of visits to Alfred's house. He had been organizing books in the study while Alfred napped upstairs, a task that seemed simple until he found the manuscript hidden behind a loose panel in the antique desk. The title page read "Shadows of Redemption" by Alfred Thompson, but the sticky note attached bore a different message: "Final draft with William's revisions, pending publication under a .T.'s name." The date showed it was from 5 years ago, well after Alfred had supposedly stopped writing. Jordan's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. The writing style was noticeably different from Alfred's earlier works, which he'd been studying during their sessions. More importantly, several pages contained handwritten notes in the margins. "Dad won't notice these changes. Publicity team ready for summer release." A soft creak from the doorway made Jordan spin around, nearly dropping the manuscript. Alfred stood there, leaning heavily on his cane, his face a mask of resignation. "I wondered when someone would find those," he said quietly, "though I didn't expect it to be you." Over the next hour, in the fading afternoon light, Alfred revealed the truth. William had taken advantage of his father's depressive episode years ago, hiring ghostwriters to produce novels under Alfred's name. The profits funded William's political ambitions and the prestigious Thompson Literary Foundation, while Alfred's protests were silenced through a combination of threats and manipulation. The foundation judges every major literary contest in Portland, Alfred explained, his voice heavy. William controls which voices get heard, which stories get told. He's built an empire on stolen words. Jordan listened, his mind racing to connect the dots. The foundation's recent rejection of several promising minority writers made more sense now. William Thompson hadn't just stolen his father's legacy, he'd created a system to control the narrative itself. Why not expose him, Jordan asked, but even as he spoke, Alfred was shaking his head. William has evidence suggesting I knew about and approved everything, Alfred replied. He's Portland's deputy district attorney now. Who would believe an old man with a history of depression over him? The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. Alfred's face paled. William's early, he whispered. Quick, through the back door. Don't let him see you. Jordan had barely slipped out when William Thompson strode into the study. Tall, impeccably dressed, with Alfred's blue eyes but none of his warmth, William emanated authority. Through the window, Jordan watched their interaction, William's patronizing pat on his father's shoulder, Alfred's subtle flinch. The next day, Jordan received a visit at Carter's Diner. A man in an expensive suit sat in his section, ordered nothing, and smiled pleasantly while explaining how unfortunate it would be if Jordan's mother lost her hospital insurance due to administrative errors. The Thompson Foundation does a lot of good work, the man said, sliding a business card across the table. It would be a shame if anything disrupted that. Mr. William Thompson wanted to ensure you understood the delicate nature of family matters. That evening, Jordan discovered his notebook missing from his backpack. It returned the next day, placed neatly on his doorstep with a post-it note, consider this a friendly warning. W.T. The threats were subtle but clear. William Thompson had eyes everywhere, and he knew exactly how to apply pressure. Jordan's school records mysteriously began showing attendance issues. His mother's medical bills suddenly included charges from years ago. Even his regular customers at the diner started receiving warnings about suspicious activity in their credit cards after dining in his section. Yet something in Jordan refused to back down. Perhaps it was the memory of Alfred's face when he spoke of his stolen legacy, or the realization that others had suffered similar intimidation. He began documenting everything, photographing manuscripts, recording conversations, saving threatening notes. Most importantly, he started writing the story. Not just Alfred's story, but the larger narrative of power, corruption, and the silencing of voices. He wrote in secret, during breaks at work, in the early morning hours before his mother woke. The words poured out, fueled by a righteous anger he'd never known he possessed. Alfred noticed the change in Jordan but said nothing, though his eyes held a mixture of pride and fear. They continued their writing sessions, now laden with deeper meaning. Every lesson about structure and style became a lesson in courage and truth-telling. Words have power, Alfred told him during one session, his voice barely above a whisper. That's why some people work so hard to control them. Jordan nodded, understanding finally why Alfred had chosen him as a student. Sometimes the only way to fight silence was with stories, and some stories needed fresh voices to tell them. The manila envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered to Jordan's apartment by courier. Inside were photos Jordan helping Alfred with groceries, their writing sessions through the study window, Jordan photographing documents in Alfred's library. The final image showed his mother entering Portland General Hospital for her weekly treatment. Attached was a handwritten note, your mother's insurance coverage comes up for review next month. Make the right choice. W.T. Jordan sat at their small kitchen table, photos spread before him, as the weight of his situation pressed down like a physical force. His mother's lupus required specific treatments that they could never afford without insurance. The thought of her face when he'd have to explain why her coverage was canceled made his stomach turn. Sarah Walker noticed something was wrong when she returned from her shift that evening. Despite Jordan's attempts to hide the photos, she saw the worry etched in his features, a look too old for his 16 years. "Baby, what's happening?" she asked, her nurse's intuition cutting through his defenses. Jordan's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her everything about Alfred's stolen legacy, William's corruption, the threats, and the story he was writing to expose it all. But her hands trembled slightly as she made tea a symptom of her condition, and he remembered the stack of medical bills in his desk drawer. Just tired from work, he lied, hating himself for it. Mr. Peterson added some extra shifts at the diner. That night, Jordan paced his small room, torn between conscience and necessity. His notebook lay open on the desk, filled with evidence of William's corruption. Each page represented a choice between truth and survival. The next morning, Mrs. Reynolds, his English teacher, stopped him after class. "Jordan, your recent essay," she hesitated. "There seem to be some irregularities. The school board is questioning your grades." He recognized William's influence, another pressure point, another reminder of his vulnerability. His scholarship chances, already fragile, could vanish with a few administrative adjustments. During his next visit to Alfred's house, Jordan found the old man more agitated than usual. William's foundation rejected another minority writer yesterday, Alfred said, hands shaking as he poured tea. Talented young woman, writing about immigrant experiences. They called it not marketable enough. Jordan thought about his own story, growing in secret on his laptop. How many other voices had been silenced? How many dreams crushed under the weight of William's influence? A call from the hospital billing department added to his pressure. "We're reviewing your mother's coverage," the administrator explained. There seemed to be some discrepancies. That evening, Jordan sat with his mother as she dozed on their worn couch, medical papers scattered around her. Her face showed the strain of fighting both illness and poverty, yet she still managed to smile when she caught him watching her. "You know what I'm proud of," she said softly. "You never lost your kindness, baby, no matter how hard things got." Her words hit him like a physical blow. Kindness had led him to help Alfred that day at Morrison's. Kindness had opened this door. But now kindness itself seemed like a luxury he couldn't afford. Jordan pulled out his phone and stared at the number William's associate had left. One call could end this. He could apologize, promise silence, protect his mother's insurance and his academic future. The choice seemed simple when viewed through the lens of survival. But then he remembered Alfred's face when discussing his stolen legacy, the rejected writers whose voices would never be heard, the system of corruption that fed on silence and fear. He thought about his own story burning to be told. His mother's words from years ago echoed in his mind. "We might be struggling, but we're not broken." The choice between truth and survival was a false one, he realized. Some silences broke you more surely than any struggle. Jordan closed his phone without making the call. Instead, he opened his laptop and began to write. If William wanted to destroy them, he would at least ensure the truth survived. The next morning, he slipped a note under Alfred's door. "I'm choosing truth. Whatever happens, thank you for showing me the power of words." Alfred found the note and held it with trembling hands, pride and fear warring in his heart. He recognized in Jordan's choice the courage he had lost years ago, but he also knew, better than most, the price of standing up to power. As William's pressure increased in the following days, Jordan clung to a simple truth: some stories needed to be told, no matter the cost. His mother had taught him about kindness. Alfred had taught him about courage. Now he would teach them both about standing firm in the face of injustice. The Portland Herald's office buzzed with typical newsroom energy when Jordan pushed through the glass doors, clutching his backpack close. Sarah Mitchell, the investigative reporter whose articles on corruption had caught his attention, looked up from her desk with mild irritation at the interruption. "I have something you need to see," Jordan said before she could dismiss him. He pulled out a carefully organized folder of documents, photographs, and transcribed conversations. "It's about William Thompson and the Literary Foundation." Sarah's expression shifted from annoyance to interest as she scanned the first few pages. 20 years of journalism had taught her to recognize a real story when she saw one. "Sit down," she said, clearing space on her cluttered desk. "Start from the beginning." Over the next 2 hours, Jordan laid out the evidence, the ghost-written manuscripts, the systematic suppression of minority voices, the web of influence that William had built using his father's stolen legacy. Sarah's pen moved rapidly across her notepad, her questions sharp and focused. "You understand what you're doing?" she asked finally. William Thompson isn't just any deputy day. He's being groomed for a Senate run. His connections go all the way to Washington. Jordan nodded, thinking of his mother's medical bills and his threatened future. I understand the cost of staying silent better than the cost of speaking up. Sarah studied him for a long moment before reaching into her desk drawer. She pulled out a thick file, spreading its contents across the desk. 3 years ago, I started investigating irregularities in the Foundation's grant distributions. 2 sources disappeared overnight, one to a sudden job opportunity in Alaska, another to a mysterious family emergency in Europe. The documents revealed a pattern promising writers from marginalized communities receiving rejections despite high recommendations, while connected insiders won awards for mediocre work. Foundation funds flowed through a maze of shell companies, eventually feeding into Williams' political activities. I couldn't prove it then, Sarah explained. But with Alfred's testimony and your evidence, she paused, considering. We need more. Personal accounts from other victims, financial records, everything we can get. They developed a careful strategy. Sarah would discreetly contact rejected writers while Jordan gathered more evidence from Alfred's house. They would build their case methodically, knowing they would only get one chance to expose the truth. The first breakthrough came from Elena Rodriguez, a former Foundation employee who had quit after witnessing systematic discrimination. They had a coded language she revealed in a recorded interview. Stories about immigrants or minorities were always not commercially viable or too niche market. More witnesses emerged. Dr. James Chen, whose research into literary gatekeeping had been buried after threatening the Foundation's practices. Maria Santos, whose award-winning manuscript was rejected hours after William discovered her background. Marcus Johnson, whose publishing contract mysteriously vanished after questioning the Foundation's decisions. Each story added another piece to the puzzle, revealing the full scope of William's influence. The Foundation wasn't just controlling literary prizes, it was shaping Portland's cultural narrative itself, deciding whose voices deserved to be heard. Jordan continued his visits to Alfred, now with a hidden purpose. Each writing lesson became an opportunity to document more evidence. Alfred, seeming to understand without being told, began accidentally leaving relevant documents in view. Sarah's network of sources provided financial records showing suspicious patterns in the Foundation's activities. Look at these grant distributions, she pointed out during one late-night meeting. Every major award for the past 5 years went to writers connected to Williams' political donors. The investigation consumed Jordan's free time. He wrote between shifts at the diner, photographed documents during his visits to Alfred, and met with Sarah during his lunch breaks. His grades suffered, but even Mrs. Reynolds noticed a new intensity in his writing. They worked carefully, knowing they were building more than just an expose. This was about justice, about giving voice to those who had been silenced. Each piece of evidence was meticulously verified and backed up in multiple locations. Your father's novels, Jordan asked Alfred during one session, the real ones, do you have copies of the original manuscripts? Alfred's hands trembled as he unlocked a hidden safe behind his desk panel. I kept everything, he said, revealing stacks of papers. I couldn't bear to destroy them, even when William insisted. The manuscripts provided irrefutable proof of the stylistic differences between Alfred's genuine work and the ghostwritten books. Sarah brought in literary experts who confirmed what Jordan had first noticed: the later books couldn't possibly have been written by the same author. As their case grew stronger, so did the sense of urgency. Williams' associates began appearing more frequently around the Herald's office. Sarah's phone showed signs of being tapped. Jordan noticed unfamiliar cars following him home from school. We're close to something big, Sarah said during one tense meeting. Williams planning to announce his Senate campaign next month. The Foundation's legitimacy is crucial to his political image. Jordan thought about all the voices that had been silenced, all the stories that had never been told. He thought about Alfred, living with the weight of stolen words, and his mother, who had taught him the value of truth. When do we publish, he asked. Sarah met his gaze steadily. When we can prove everything beyond doubt. These people, they'll try to discredit us, destroy us. We need to make every word bulletproof. Jordan nodded, understanding that they were building more than just an article. They were constructing a case for justice, a voice for the voiceless, a chance to rewrite the narrative that William had so carefully controlled. As he left the Herald that evening, Jordan felt the weight of all the collected evidence in his backpack. Each document, each testimony, each piece of proof was another word in the story that needed to be told. The truth was taking shape, one careful step at a time, building toward a revelation that would shake Portland's power structure to its core. The first direct attack came without warning. Sarah Walker arrived home from her hospital shift to find an eviction notice taped to their apartment door. The landlord, suddenly concerned about code violations, had given them 30 days to vacate. Jordan recognized William's influence in the timing just as their investigation was gathering momentum. That same week, Jordan's hours at Carter's Diner were mysteriously cut in half. His manager, Mike, looked genuinely pained as he delivered the news. "Corporate decision," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. Nothing personal. Kid, the reduction in income hit hard, especially with his mother's medical bills mounting. The pressure extended to school. His previously stellar attendance record now showed unexplained absences. College recommendation letters from teachers began disappearing from his applications. Mrs. Reynolds, his English teacher and longtime supporter, was transferred to another district with no explanation. "They're trying to isolate us," Sarah Mitchell explained during a hushed meeting in the Herald's archive room. "It's a classic intimidation tactic. Make the target feel alone, vulnerable." She passed him a burner phone. "Use this for our communications. Your regular phone is definitely compromised." At home, Jordan watched his mother struggle to hide her worry. The insurance company had started questioning her treatments, requiring additional paperwork and delaying approvals. Each delay meant more pain, more symptoms, more strain on her already exhausted body. "Maybe we should consider that clinical trial in Seattle," she suggested one evening, trying to sound casual. "They're offering compensation for participants." Jordan heard the unspoken message: she was willing to risk experimental treatment to ease their financial burden. Alfred's situation deteriorated as well. William increased his wellness checks, bringing a private nurse who reported every visitor and activity. The old man's movements were increasingly restricted, his phone calls monitored, his mail screened. During their now clandestine writing sessions, Jordan noticed Alfred's declining health. The stress of maintaining their secret collaboration while under William's surveillance was taking its toll. His hands shook more pronounced, and his once sharp mind occasionally wandered. "I'm sorry," Alfred said during one particularly difficult moment, his voice breaking. "I never meant to drag you into this. The cost, it's too high." He gestured weakly at the growing stack of unpaid bills on Jordan's desk, visible through the study window. Jordan thought about backing down. The weight of responsibility to his mother, to Alfred, to all the others counting on their investigation felt crushing. He was, after all, just a 16-year-old kid facing off against one of Portland's most powerful figures. But then came the letters. They started arriving at the Herald, addressed to Sarah but meant for Jordan. Writers who had been silenced, artists whose work had been suppressed, employees who had witnessed the Foundation's discrimination, all sharing their stories, offering support, thanking him for fighting back. "Your courage gives us hope," one letter read. "For years we thought we were alone in this fight." Another: "My daughter wants to be a writer. Thanks to you, maybe she'll have a fair chance." The letters strengthened his resolve, even as the pressure intensified. When his mother's hospital reported computer issues affecting her appointment schedule, Jordan started accompanying her to every visit, documenting each delay and denial. Sarah Mitchell's investigation faced its own challenges. Her editor received threatening calls from advertisers. Anonymous sources suddenly went quiet. Even her apartment was broken into, though nothing was stolen, just papers rearranged, a reminder that she wasn't safe. The personal cost became physical as well as emotional. Jordan slept less, worked more, trying to make up for lost income while maintaining his investigation. Dark circles appeared under his eyes, matching those of his mother, who worked extra shifts despite her deteriorating health. Alfred's health declined more rapidly. During one visit, Jordan found him confused, disoriented. The words he kept saying, "They're stealing all the words the private nurse William had hired," simply increased his medication, keeping him docile and confused. Yet something unexpected emerged from their shared struggle. An underground network of support developed, small acts of kindness from those who understood their fight. The diner's cook slipped extra food into Jordan's take-home meals. A sympathetic nurse at the hospital expedited his mother's paperwork. Anonymous donations appeared to help with rent. "They can't break us if we stand together," Sarah Mitchell reminded him during their meetings. "Every person they've silenced, every story they've suppressed, it all becomes evidence. Their strength lies in isolation. Ours lies in unity." Jordan continued writing through it all. His story grew beyond Alfred's stolen legacy, becoming a testament to resilience in the face of systemic corruption. He wrote about his mother's quiet strength, about Alfred's determination to reclaim his voice, about all those who refused to be silenced. As the personal costs mounted, so did their resolve. Each new pressure point, each attempt at intimidation only reinforced the importance of their mission. They weren't just fighting for justice anymore, they were fighting for the right to exist, to speak, to be heard. One evening, looking at his mother sleeping on the couch, medical papers scattered around her, Jordan made a silent promise. The cost of speaking truth might be high, but the cost of silence was even higher. They would see this through no matter what came next. The Portland Literary Excellence Competition announcement arrived in Jordan's school email with ceremonial flourish. Sponsored by the Thompson Foundation, it promised national recognition and a substantial scholarship to the winner. The theme, truth and power in modern society, seemed like a cruel joke given the circumstances. Sarah Mitchell saw it differently. "This is our opportunity," she said, spreading competition details across her desk. "Their own platform, their own rules, will use it against them." Her eyes sparkled with the kind of determination that had won her 2 Pulitzer nominations. The plan was audacious. Jordan would enter the competition with a piece that exposed the truth about William Thompson and the Foundation disguised as fiction. The story would be carefully crafted to protect their sources while revealing enough to trigger public scrutiny. They'll have to either reject a clearly superior work, proving their bias, Sarah explained, or accept it and give us a platform for the truth. Either way, we win. Jordan worked through sleepless nights, weaving together the evidence they'd gathered into a compelling narrative. He wrote about an aging author whose words were stolen by his ambitious son, about systemic corruption masked as cultural gatekeeping, about voices silenced in the name of power. Alfred, during their increasingly rare clear moments, helped refine the manuscript. "Make the truth sing," he advised, his trembling hands marking passages for revision. "Let the evidence speak through the story, not over it." The submission deadline approached as William's pressure intensified. Jordan's mother received notice that her insurance coverage was under review. His remaining work hours were cut again. Even his school locker was vandalized, research notes scattered and destroyed. Yet the story grew stronger with each attack. Jordan wove their intimidation tactics into the narrative, transforming their threats into evidence of their desperation. The manuscript became not just an expose, but a testament to resilience in the face of corruption. The competition's first round judges, independent literature professors from across the country, responded enthusiastically. Jordan's piece advanced to the semifinals, then the finals. William, confident in his control over the final selection committee, remained unaware of the threat hiding in plain sight. The Foundation's annual awards ceremony was scheduled for the Portland Cultural Center, a grand venue that usually hosted symphony orchestras and opera performances. Jordan received his finalist notification with an expensive invitation and strict instructions about dress code and protocol. Sarah Mitchell arranged press coverage, carefully selecting journalists known for their integrity. "The story needs witnesses," she insisted, helping Jordan prepare his acceptance speech just in case. "Whatever happens, we'll have eyes on it." The day before the ceremony, William made his move. Jordan's school received an anonymous tip about plagiarism in his previous work. His finalist status was suddenly under review. The Foundation's board called an emergency meeting to discuss serious concerns about his submission. Alfred, hearing about the accusations, forced himself out of his medicated haze long enough to make a crucial decision. He called his old publisher, a woman who had known him before William's takeover of his career. In a shaking voice, he confirmed every detail of Jordan's story. The publisher, Margaret Chin, arrived at the Herald's office hours later with decades of correspondence proving William's deception. "I've waited years for someone brave enough to fight this," she told Sarah Mitchell. "Your boy has more courage than all of us combined." Jordan spent the night before the ceremony at his mother's hospital bedside. Her latest treatment had been accidentally rescheduled, forcing her to miss her son's potential triumph. Looking at her sleeping form, Jordan felt the full weight of their struggle and the importance of seeing it through. Win or lose, he whispered to her, we're telling the truth. That's what matters. The morning of the ceremony brought new attempts at intimidation. Jordan's invitation was briefly lost at reception. His assigned seat was changed multiple times. Even his manuscript copies in the finalist display mysteriously disappeared. But they had anticipated every move. Sarah Mitchell had backup copies ready. Margaret Chen's presence made it impossible to disqualify him without explanation. And Alfred, despite William's efforts to keep him away, had insisted on attending as a former Foundation Board member, a position that couldn't be denied without raising questions. As Jordan took his seat among the finalists, he felt the weight of all their collected evidence in his breast pocket. The story he had submitted was more than just a competition entry. It was a key turning a lock that had kept too many voices silent for too long. William Thompson stood at the podium, unaware that his carefully constructed world was about to change forever. He smiled his practiced political smile, tapped the microphone, and began his opening speech about the power of storytelling in modern society. Jordan watched him, thinking about all the stories that hadn't been told, all the voices that had been silenced. Win or lose, their truth was about to be heard. The real competition wasn't for a scholarship or recognition, it was for the right to speak truth to power. The envelope containing the judge's decision sat unopened on the podium, waiting like a lit fuse for the moment of revelation. William Thompson's practiced smile faltered as he opened the envelope. For a fraction of a second, his mask slipped, revealing genuine shock before his political training reasserted control. The winner of this year's Portland Literary Excellence Award, he announced, his voice carrying the slightest tremor, is Jordan Walker. The applause started politely, then grew as Jordan approached the podium. Sarah Mitchell's carefully positioned journalists leaned forward, cameras ready. In the audience, Alfred Thompson sat straighter, his eyes suddenly clear and focused. Jordan's manuscript, titled Inherited Silence, lay open on the podium. As he began reading, the room's atmosphere shifted. His words, carefully crafted to weave fact through fiction, painted a devastating picture of systemic corruption and stolen legacies. In a city where truth was currency, he read, one man built an empire on borrowed words and broken promises. His father's silence became his foundation, other voices mere casualties in his ascent to power. The metaphors were transparent to those who knew where to look. William's face grew increasingly rigid as Jordan continued reading. In the press section, reporters began making connections, whispering among themselves. Halfway through the reading, William attempted to intervene, citing time constraints. But Margaret Chen, seated in the front row, stood up. As a founding member of this foundation, she announced clearly, I insist on hearing the full piece. Jordan continued, his voice growing stronger. He read about suppressed minority writers, about threatening visits from well-dressed men, about medical insurance mysteriously canceled. Each fictional incident matched perfectly with documented cases in Sarah Mitchell's investigation. The audience's reaction shifted from literary appreciation to dawning understanding. Several Foundation Board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. A prominent donor quietly left his seat. In the back, Sarah Mitchell noticed several journalists making urgent phone calls. When Jordan reached the passage about the father's stolen words, Alfred Thompson began to weep silently. The sound drew attention, forcing people to look at the frail man who had once been their celebrated author. William made another attempt to end the reading, but now other voices joined Margaret Chen's protest. Elena Rodriguez, the former Foundation employee, stood up. Then Dr. James Chen. Then Maria Santos. One by one, those who had been silenced found their voices. Jordan's final paragraph hit like a thunderbolt. The truth does not require belief to exist. It waits, patient as winter, until someone finds the courage to speak it. Today, that silence ends. The aftermath was immediate and chaotic. Journalists swarmed forward, questions flying. William attempted to maintain control, dismissing Jordan's piece as creative fiction from an imaginative young mind. But Sarah Mitchell was ready. She stood holding up a USB drive. I have here," she announced, "documented evidence of every incident described in Jordan's fiction testimonies, financial records, original manuscripts, and correspondence proving systematic discrimination and fraud." Margaret Chin stepped forward next, adding her decades of publishing documentation to the evidence. Then Elena Rodriguez presented her recorded conversations with Foundation officials. The dam had broken. William's political training finally failed him. His face contorted with rage as he realized the trap he'd walked into. "This is absurd," he sputtered. "You can't possibly believe the accusations of a teenager and a washed-up reporter." Actually, Alfred Thompson's voice cut through the chaos. Surprisingly strong, they can believe his father. He stood shakily, supported by his cane. "I've watched you steal my words, suppress others' voices, and corrupt everything I spent my life building. Today, I'm breaking my silence." The press conference that followed was unlike anything Portland had seen. For 2 hours, victims of the Foundation's discrimination stepped forward to tell their stories. Sarah Mitchell distributed evidence packages to selected journalists. Margaret Chin confirmed years of literary fraud. William Thompson fled the building, but the damage was done. His carefully constructed image crumbled under the weight of undeniable evidence. By evening, national news networks had picked up the story. Jordan's victory speech never happened. It didn't need to. The truth he'd fought to expose was finally spreading, unstoppable as a breaking dawn. His words, combined with Sarah's evidence and the testimony of countless others, had accomplished what years of individual struggles couldn't. The Foundation's board announced an emergency meeting. William's political supporters began distancing themselves. The Department of Justice launched a preliminary investigation into the Foundation's financial practices. In the aftermath, Jordan found Alfred sitting quietly in the emptying auditorium. "You did it, son," the old man said softly. "You found a way to make the truth heard." Jordan looked at his mentor, seeing strength returning to the old man's frame now that the burden of silence had lifted. "We did it," he corrected. "All of us together." Outside, reporters continued to gather. The story was growing beyond Portland, touching on larger issues of power, privilege, and the control of cultural narratives. But for now, in the quiet of the auditorium, teacher and student sat together, surrounded by the echo of truth finally spoken aloud. Friends, storytellers like Jordan remind us that every voice matters. If this tale touched your heart, let's stay connected for more inspiring stories by hitting that subscribe button. Together, we can keep powerful narratives like these alive. Your support makes these stories possible. The retaliation came swiftly and without mercy. 3 days after the awards ceremony, Sarah Walker's medical insurance was abruptly terminated. The hospital administration, citing policy changes, informed her that her ongoing treatments would need to be paid in full, up front. Jordan stood in the hospital corridor, clutching the termination notice while watching his mother struggle through another lupus flare-up. The timing couldn't have been worse. Her condition had deteriorated significantly due to the stress of recent events. "We'll figure something out," she whispered, her voice weak but determined. "We always do," but the tremor in her hands betrayed her fear. Without treatment, the disease would progress rapidly. They both knew the implications, though neither dared speak them aloud. The apartment eviction notice became final the same day. Their landlord, suddenly facing pressure from city inspectors, gave them 48 hours to vacate. Jordan spent a sleepless night packing their belongings into cardboard boxes, his mother's labored breathing from the next room serving as a constant reminder of what was at stake. Sarah Mitchell arrived at their apartment early the next morning, her face grave. "They've frozen my accounts," she reported. "Every source of funding we could have used to help." She pulled out a small envelope containing cash or emergency savings. "It's not much, but..." Jordan stopped her. "We can't take your money. They'll come after you next." "They already have," she replied, showing him her termination letter from the Herald. The newspaper's ownership had suddenly decided to restructure their investigative department. Alfred's situation deteriorated dramatically. William had him forcibly moved to a private care facility, citing concerns about his mental state. When Jordan tried to visit, he was turned away by security guards who showed him a court order declaring Alfred incompetent to receive visitors. Through a sympathetic nurse, they learned that Alfred was being kept heavily sedated. "He asks for you," the nurse whispered during a clandestine phone call, "when he's lucid enough to remember." The school board called an emergency meeting to discuss Jordan's disciplinary issues. Despite his perfect record, they were considering expulsion based on anonymous complaints. His college applications already submitted began receiving automatic rejections. Carter's Diner, his last remaining source of income, fired him after a surprise health inspection found critical violations at only his workstation. His former customers, many of whom had supported him for years, were warned about potential health risks from his previous shifts. The local media, initially supportive after the awards ceremony, began publishing subtle retractions and clarifications. Words like alleged and unsubstantiated crept into their coverage. Several reporters who had championed their cause were reassigned to different beats. Jordan watched helplessly as their support system crumbled. The underground network that had sustained them faced its own pressures. Anonymous donations stopped. Sympathetic hospital staff were transferred. Even their neighbors began avoiding eye contact in the hallways. His mother's condition worsened without proper treatment. One evening, he found her collapsed in their half-packed apartment, her breathing shallow and irregular. The emergency room staff treated her with barely concealed reluctance, making them wait hours for basic care. "Maybe we should take their deal," she suggested during one particularly bad night, referring to Williams' offer of full medical coverage in exchange for a public retraction. The pain in her voice cut deeper than any threat had managed to. Jordan sat by her hospital bed, watching the machines track her declining health. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him with crushing force. His words had sparked this revolution, but the cost was being paid by everyone he loved. Sarah Mitchell visited when she could, bringing updates from their dwindling network of allies. "They're trying to isolate us," she explained, "break our spirit by breaking our connections." The strategy was working. One by one, their supporters disappeared, some through direct pressure, others through the simple human need to protect their own families. The truth they had fought so hard to expose was being buried under an avalanche of manufactured doubt and institutional pressure. Jordan stood at his mother's window late one night, watching the city lights blur through his tears. The truth had cost them everything: their home, their security, their community. Now it might cost him his mother's life. The morning brought more bad news. Alfred had been transferred to an undisclosed facility. Their evidence was being systematically discredited. Their voices, so recently powerful, were being silenced once again. The darkness seemed complete, but even then Jordan couldn't bring himself to regret speaking the truth. Some prices, he realized, were meant to be paid, though he never imagined the bill would be this steep. The hospital chapel became Jordan's refuge during his mother's critical hours. Sitting in the dim light, surrounded by empty pews, he questioned every decision that had led to this moment. The truth had seemed worth any price, but watching his mother fight for her life made that conviction waver. Sarah Mitchell found him there one evening, his head bowed over a notebook filled with desperate calculations. Every attempt to find funding for his mother's treatment led to another dead end. The few organizations willing to help mysteriously withdrew their offers after receiving anonymous concerns. "They're calling it the Portland literary scandal now," she said softly, sliding a newspaper across the pew. The headline suggested fraud, not in Williams' actions, but in their exposure of them. Their evidence was being reframed as a teenage fantasy enabled by a desperate reporter. Alfred's voice echoed in Jordan's mind. Words have power now. Those same words were being twisted against them, reshaped into weapons by Williams' media machine. Each new article questioned Jordan's credibility, painted Sarah Mitchell as a fame-seeking journalist, and portrayed Alfred as a senile old man manipulated by opportunists. The hospital administration delivered their final warning without immediate payment. Sarah Walker would be transferred to a state facility ill-equipped to handle her condition. Jordan's attempts to contact Alfred's old publisher or other allies met with silence or apologetic refusals. "I can't blame them," Sarah Mitchell admitted, her own voice heavy with exhaustion. "Williams reaching into their lives, to their jobs, their families. Fear is a powerful silencer." Jordan's mother, during her increasingly rare lucid moments, tried to maintain her strength. "This isn't your fault, baby," she whispered, though the machines monitoring her condition told a different story. Her body was failing without proper treatment, the disease advancing unchecked. The darkness crept into Jordan's writing. His once powerful words felt hollow now, unable to protect those he loved. Each night he sat in the hospital corridor, attempting to find meaning in their suffering, trying to understand how truth could cost so much while lies seemed to prosper. News arrived that Alfred had suffered a stroke in his secured facility. The official report cited natural causes, but the timing seemed too convenient. Jordan's request to visit was denied, the restraining order still in effect. The thought of his mentor dying alone, silenced and sedated, added another layer to his despair. Their allies continued to fall. Elena Rodriguez, who had bravely testified about the Foundation's discrimination, lost her new job and was facing deportation over suddenly discovered paperwork issues. Dr. James Chin's research funding was unexpectedly canceled. Maria Santos's publishing contract was terminated. The pressure began affecting Jordan's health. Sleepless nights and constant stress left him vulnerable. During one hospital visit, he collapsed from exhaustion, leading to worried whispers among the staff about hereditary conditions and mental instability. Sarah Mitchell, despite her own struggles, tried to maintain their fight. But with her journalistic credentials destroyed and her savings depleted, her resources were limited. Each small victory was met with overwhelming counterattacks from William's seemingly endless network of influence. The darkest moment came when Jordan's mother, during a particularly bad episode, begged him to accept William's offer. "Your future matters more than pride," she pleaded, her voice barely a whisper. "Sometimes survival has to come first." The temptation to give in became almost unbearable. William's representatives made regular appearances, each time increasing their offers while reminding Jordan of his mother's deteriorating condition. The choice seemed simple: his principles or his mother's life. In the chapel one night, Jordan found himself crying for the first time since everything began. The tears weren't just for their current situation, but for all the others who had faced similar choices: principles versus survival, truth versus safety. The notebook that had once held his powerful expose now contained desperate plans and abandoned hopes. Each entry reflected their increasing isolation, the systematic dismantling of their support network, the slow crushing of their resistance. Yet something in Jordan refused to break completely. Perhaps it was his mother's lifetime of quiet strength, or Alfred's lessons about the importance of voice, or simply the stubborn belief that truth, no matter how costly, mattered. But sitting there in the dim chapel light, watching his mother's life slip away while their world crumbled, Jordan faced the darkest question of all: was the truth worth dying for? And more importantly, was it worth watching others die for? The turning point came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Thompson, William's wife of 20 years, arrived at the hospital on a quiet Sunday morning. She found Jordan dozing in the hard plastic chair beside his mother's bed, his notebook fallen open on the floor. "I've been watching," she said softly, startling him awake. "Everything he's doing to you, to Alfred, to everyone, it's exactly what he did to me." She pulled out a USB drive from her designer handbag. "I've been gathering evidence for years, waiting for the right moment." The drive contained 2 decades of meticulously documented corruption, private emails detailing blackmail schemes, financial records showing money laundered through the Foundation, recorded conversations of William threatening opponents. Most damaging of all, video footage of William admitting to stealing his father's work and systematically suppressing minority voices. "He never thought I was paying attention," Jennifer explained, her hands trembling slightly. The quiet trophy wife smiling at parties, playing her role. "I learned to keep records after he threatened to have me committed when I first discovered the plagiarism." Sarah Mitchell, summoned to an urgent meeting at a small coffee shop far from her usual haunts, reviewed the evidence with growing excitement. "This isn't just about literary fraud anymore," she breathed. "This is political corruption at the highest levels." The evidence revealed a network far more extensive than they had imagined. William hadn't just stolen his father's legacy, he'd built an empire of corruption using the Foundation as a front. Campaign contributions were laundered through literary grants. Political opponents were silenced through carefully orchestrated scandals. Even federal investigations had been derailed through his connections. Jennifer's records included a particularly damning video William discussing with his associates how to use the Foundation to control Portland's cultural narrative, keep the minorities fighting for scraps. He laughed in the footage. "While we shaped the story of this city." But the most shocking revelation concerned Alfred's current situation. William had been slowly poisoning his father for months, adding medications to his food to induce confusion and dependency. The private care facility was essentially a prison designed to keep Alfred silent until William's Senate campaign launched. "He's planning to announce his candidacy next week," Jennifer revealed. "Everything's arranged: the endorsements, the media coverage, even Alfred's convenient passing from natural causes just before the announcement." Jordan felt the weight of this new information like a physical blow. They had uncovered not just corruption but attempted murder. Yet the evidence had to be handled carefully. One wrong move and William would realize his wife had turned against him. Sarah Mitchell activated her remaining media contacts, carefully preparing the story for maximum impact. Jennifer's evidence was verified by multiple sources, copies secured in various locations. They couldn't risk William burying the truth again. The breakthrough with Alfred's situation came through Jennifer's social connections. As William's wife, she had access to the care facility. Under the guise of a routine visit, she managed to record Alfred's true condition and smuggle out his personal journals, documents that proved his mental competency. To release everything, Jordan decided, looking at his mother's weakening form. All of it. No more partial truths, no more careful strategies. The whole story needs to come out. The plan they devised was comprehensive. Sarah Mitchell would release the evidence to multiple news outlets simultaneously. Jennifer would file for divorce, publicly testifying about William's crimes. Jordan would submit Alfred's journals and medical evidence to the state attorney general. They chose their timing carefully. William had scheduled a major fundraising event, gathering Portland's elite to support his upcoming Senate announcement. The city's most influential people would be present, including those who had helped suppress the truth. The story broke like a tsunami. Major networks interrupted regular programming to report on the scandal. Social media exploded with Jennifer's videos. Alfred's journals showing his clear mental state and documenting William's systematic abuse became instant viral sensations. William, standing at the podium during his fundraiser, watched his phone explode with notifications. His carefully constructed world began crumbling in real time, live on national television. The evidence was too overwhelming, too well documented to deny. The most damaging revelation came from Jennifer herself, speaking live on national news. "My husband didn't just steal his father's words, he tried to steal his life. And he's been doing the same to this city, stealing voices, suppressing truth, building power through corruption and fear." Jordan watched the coverage from his mother's hospital room, holding her hand as the truth finally emerged in its entirety. The story had grown beyond their initial expose, becoming a landmark case of political corruption and systematic abuse of power. As William's empire crumbled, the ripple effect spread rapidly. Foundation board members rushed to distance themselves. Political allies issued hasty denials. The Department of Justice announced an immediate investigation into the Foundation's activities. The truth, so long suppressed, was finally free. But for Jordan, watching his mother's monitors beep steadily in the quiet hospital room, the question remained: had it come in time to save those who had sacrificed the most in its pursuit? The next 24 hours would determine not just the fate of William Thompson's corrupt empire, but the lives of those who had dared to stand against it. The Department of Justice moved with unprecedented speed. Within hours of Jennifer's revelations, federal agents secured the Foundation's offices and William's private residences. His attempts to flee were thwarted at Portland International Airport, where agents intercepted him attempting to board a private jet to the Cayman Islands. The scene of William Thompson being led away in handcuffs played on every news channel. His perfectly tailored suit and practiced smile couldn't mask the defeat in his eyes. The carefully constructed facade of power had crumbled, revealing the corruption beneath. Sarah Mitchell's comprehensive report, published simultaneously across multiple platforms, detailed the full scope of William's crimes. The Foundation's financial records revealed millions in embezzled funds, systematic discrimination, and political bribes disguised as literary grants. But the most immediate impact came at the hospital. Within hours of William's arrest, mysterious administrative issues suddenly resolved. Sarah Walker's insurance was reinstated with full coverage, including backdated treatments. A team of specialists was assembled to address her deteriorating condition. "Sometimes justice has a healing power all its own," Dr. Marcus Chin remarked as he reviewed Mrs. Walker's new treatment plan. He had been one of the first to come forward after William's arrest. revealing how the foundation had threatened his medical license when he tried to help. Alfred Thompson was immediately transferred to Portland's best medical facility. Free from the forced medication and isolation, his mental clarity returned surprisingly quickly. The reunion between mentor and student took place in Alfred's new hospital room, both men changed by their ordeal but unbroken. "You did what I couldn't," Alfred told Jordan, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "You fought back when I chose silence." The pride in his eyes spoke volumes about the transformation their relationship had undergone. The legal consequences unfolded rapidly. William faced multiple federal charges: fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, attempted murder, and corruption. Jennifer's evidence, combined with testimony from dozens of victims, created an airtight case that even his expensive lawyers couldn't dismantle. Foundation board members, desperate to save themselves, began offering evidence of their own. Each new revelation exposed deeper layers of corruption. William hadn't just controlled Portland's cultural narrative, he'd built a complex network of influence that touched every aspect of city life. Jordan's school board convened an emergency session to reverse his expulsion and restore his academic record. College admission officers, now aware of the full story, reached out with scholarship offers. The narrative had shifted. He was no longer the troublemaker, but the young hero who had exposed corruption at great personal cost. Carter's Diner rehired him with a public apology and back pay. Regular customers organized a welcome-back celebration, many admitting they had known the truth but feared speaking out. The community's healing process had begun, one small gesture at a time. Sarah Mitchell was reinstated at the Herald with a promotion and complete editorial freedom. Her first major piece after returning was a detailed account of how William's influence had shaped Portland's media landscape through intimidation and financial pressure. The Thompson Literary Foundation underwent a complete restructuring. Margaret Chin, Alfred's former publisher, was appointed interim director with a mandate to rebuild the organization's integrity. Her first action was to review every rejected manuscript from the past decade, focusing on minority voices that had been systematically suppressed. Elena Rodriguez's deportation proceedings were halted, and she was offered a position helping to reform the foundation's selection process. Dr. James Chin's research funding was restored with interest. Maria Santos's book was fast-tracked for publication with a major house. The ripple effects spread beyond Portland. Similar foundations across the country faced increased scrutiny. The scandal sparked a national conversation about cultural gatekeeping and the intersection of wealth, power, and artistic expression. William's political allies scrambled to distance themselves, but Jennifer's evidence implicated many in his schemes. Several prominent officials resigned, others faced criminal investigations. The city's power structure was undergoing a seismic shift. Alfred, watching the news from his hospital room, began writing again. His new work, tentatively titled Reclaimed Voice, chronicled not just his personal journey but the larger story of truth's triumph over power. Jordan visited daily, their writing sessions now focused on healing rather than exposure. The most profound changes were personal. Sarah Walker's health improved steadily under proper care. Jordan found himself surrounded by a stronger, more authentic support system. The community that had once shunned them now celebrated their courage. Jennifer Thompson, despite losing her privileged lifestyle, found unexpected freedom in truth-telling. She established a foundation of her own, dedicated to supporting whistleblowers and fighting systemic corruption. As winter turned to spring, justice continued its steady march. William's trial date was set, his empire dismantled piece by piece. The truth had not only survived but thrived, transforming from a dangerous secret into a force for change. Jordan, sitting with his mother and Alfred in the hospital garden one sunny afternoon, reflected on their journey. The cost had been enormous, but the victory was not just theirs. It belonged to every voice that had been silenced, every truth that had been suppressed. The city was changing, healing, growing, and in that growth they found something more valuable than justice: hope for a future where truth and power could coexist, where stories could be told without fear, where kindness was no longer seen as weakness. William Thompson's trial lasted 3 weeks, though its impact would reshape Portland for years to come. The courthouse steps became a gathering place for those who had been silenced, each day bringing new testimonies of suppression and survival. Jordan attended every session, supporting Alfred as he testified against his own son. "I loved him," Alfred said on the stand, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. But love without truth is just another form of poison. His testimony, describing years of manipulation and abuse, moved several jurors to tears. The verdict was unanimous guilty on all counts. Williams' sentence, 25 years without possibility of parole, reflected not just his crimes but the systematic nature of his corruption. As he was led away, he finally met Jordan's eyes, his facade cracking to reveal something like understanding. Sarah Walker's recovery progressed steadily. The new treatment protocols, no longer hindered by administrative errors, proved remarkably effective. She started volunteering at the hospital, helping other patients navigate the complex healthcare system that had once nearly destroyed her. Alfred's health improved dramatically once freed from Williams' influence. He moved back to his Victorian home, now filled with young writers he mentored. The house that had once been his prison became a sanctuary for emerging voices, particularly those from marginalized communities. The Thompson Literary Foundation underwent a complete transformation. Under Margaret Chen's leadership, it established the New Voices Initiative, specifically designed to support writers from backgrounds traditionally underrepresented in literature. Jordan was offered a permanent position on the selection committee. "We're not just changing who gets published," Margaret explained during the initiative's launch. "We're changing who gets to decide what stories matter." The first round of grants went to writers whose works had been previously rejected under Williams' regime. Jennifer Thompson, despite pressure from her social circle, remained committed to reform. She converted the family's summer estate into a retreat center for writers facing persecution or suppression. The first workshop, led by Alfred, focused on using personal trauma as a source of literary strength. Sarah Mitchell's investigative series on the scandal won several national awards, but more importantly, it sparked similar investigations across the country. Other cultural institutions faced increased scrutiny, leading to a broader conversation about power and representation in the arts. Jordan's college applications, once rejected through Williams' influence, received enthusiastic responses. Multiple universities offered full scholarships, attracted by his combination of literary talent and demonstrated moral courage. He chose Portland State, wanting to remain close to his support system. The city itself began healing. Community forums addressed long-standing issues of discrimination and privilege. New policies were implemented to prevent concentration of cultural power. The arts scene flourished with diverse voices finally finding platforms. Carter's Diner became a symbol of resistance, its walls now decorated with framed news articles about the scandal. Regular customers started a scholarship fund for employees pursuing education named in honor of Sarah Walker's resilience. Alfred's new book, Reclaimed Voice, became a national bestseller. Unlike his previous works, this one was openly collaborative, incorporating perspectives from others who had fought similar battles. Jordan contributed a chapter about the power of intergenerational alliance. The most profound changes were personal. Jordan and Alfred's mentor-student relationship evolved into a deep friendship based on shared struggle and triumph. Their weekly writing sessions continued, now focused on nurturing new talent rather than exposing old wrongs. Sarah Walker's recovery became a community effort. Former adversaries, recognizing their complicity in Williams' system, contributed to a healthcare fund for others facing similar challenges. The hospital implemented new policies to prevent discrimination in treatment access. Spring brought a ceremony of a different kind. The Portland Cultural Center, once Williams' domain, hosted a celebration of Voices Unbound featuring works by previously suppressed artists. Jordan watched from backstage as Alfred delivered the keynote address, his voice strong and clear. "Truth has a cost," Alfred told the packed auditorium, "but silence costs more. We are here today because one young man refused to accept that cost, refused to believe that power could forever suppress truth." Looking out at the diverse faces in the audience, Jordan realized they had achieved something greater than mere justice. They had created space for new stories, new voices, new possibilities. The truth hadn't just set them free, it had transformed their world. The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for Alfred's speech or Jordan's courage, it was for every voice that had been silenced and now sang free, for every truth that had been buried and now shone bright, for every person who had dared to believe in the power of words to change the world. 5 years after William Thompson's conviction, Jordan walked through Portland State University's campus as an adjunct professor, teaching a course titled Truth, Power, and Literary Voice. His students came from diverse backgrounds, each carrying stories that might once have been silenced. The Thompson Literary Foundation, now recognized nationally for its inclusive practices, had established satellite programs in cities across the country. Jordan served on its board alongside Alfred, helping shape policies that ensured no voice would be systematically suppressed again. Sarah Walker had fully recovered and dedicated herself to patient advocacy, establishing a nonprofit that helped others navigate the healthcare system. Her organization, Healthcare Without Barriers, became a model for similar initiatives nationwide. Alfred's Victorian home had been officially designated as a cultural landmark, now housing the Center for Literary Justice. Writers from around the world came to participate in workshops and residency programs, each contributing to a growing archive of previously suppressed voices. Sarah Mitchell's investigative journalism had sparked a national movement. Her methodology for exposing institutional corruption became part of journalism school curricula. She frequently collaborated with Jordan, teaching students how to use writing as a tool for social change. The Portland cultural landscape had transformed dramatically. The city's art scene, once controlled by a select few, now thrived with diverse voices and perspectives. Annual festivals celebrated works that challenged traditional power structures, with Jordan often serving as keynote speaker. Jennifer Thompson, despite losing her social status, found purpose in running the Writers' Retreat Center. She worked closely with Alfred, using their shared experience to help others find courage in confronting injustice. Their program had already helped launch several acclaimed new authors. Carter's Diner became more than just a restaurant. It was a symbol of resistance and redemption. The scholarship fund, now in its 5th year, had helped dozens of employees pursue higher education. Jordan still stopped by for coffee, sitting at his old station and mentoring young workers with dreams of their own. The legal reforms sparked by the case reached far beyond Portland. New anti-corruption legislation, dubbed the Thompson Act, strengthened protections for whistleblowers and established stricter oversight of cultural institutions. Jordan testified before Congress during its passage. William, serving his sentence, had begun writing his own story, a confession and examination of power's corruption. His manuscript, reviewed by Alfred and Jordan, revealed a deeper understanding of the damage he had caused and the systems that enabled him. The city's annual Voices Unbound Festival grew into a major cultural event, attracting participants from around the world. Each year, Jordan and Alfred opened the ceremony by reading from their collaborative work, The Price of Truth, a powerful reminder of their journey. Most importantly, the next generation was growing up in a different Portland. Young writers no longer feared institutional rejection based on their background. The city's literary scene reflected its full diversity, with new voices emerging regularly to critical acclaim. Alfred, though slowing with age, continued mentoring young writers. His greatest joy came from watching his students succeed on their own terms, their voices strong and authentic. The literary awards bearing his name specifically recognized works that challenged systemic inequality. The Thompson Foundation's archives were transformed into a public resource documenting both the corruption of the past and the path to reform. Researchers studied it as a case study in institutional change, while activists used it as a blueprint for challenging similar systems. Jordan's own writing evolved, focusing on themes of transformation and justice. His debut novel, Inherited Light, won multiple awards and was adopted into school curricula nationwide, but his greatest satisfaction came from helping others tell their stories. The final measure of their impact could be seen in the small moments: a young writer finding their voice, a student standing up against injustice, a community coming together to protect its vulnerable members. The truth they had fought so hard to expose had become a foundation for lasting change. On quiet evenings, Jordan, Alfred, and Sarah Walker would sometimes gather in the Victorian house's garden, sharing stories and planning for the future. Their battle had ended, but their work continued, ensuring that truth and justice remained stronger than power and privilege. The city around them had changed, but more importantly, it had learned. The price of truth had been high, but its value was beyond measure. In the end, they had created something remarkable, a world where voices could rise, stories could flourish, and truth could triumph over power. Their legacy lived on in every new voice that found the courage to speak, every story that refused to be silenced, and every truth that emerged stronger for having been tested by fire. Dear friends, Jordan's journey has touched us all deeply. If this story resonated with you, please consider becoming part of our storytelling family by hitting that subscribe button. Every subscription helps our team continue creating meaningful content like this. Share this video with your loved ones. Let's spread these powerful messages together. Don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. How did Jordan's courage inspire you? What touched your heart the most? Would you like to hear part 2 of this incredible journey? Let us know in the comments. Together, we can keep powerful stories alive. Thank you for being part of this community.